And we are back with the Victory Degree podcast. Today's episode is going to be very exciting because we have Dallas Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy in the building. Mike, how are you doing?
Well, I'm just drawing up plays, trying to figure it all out.
I figured I had to start with a bad joke. So a lot of people confuse you, obviously, with Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy. You are obviously Mike McCartney, so close but off by one letter. Does it ever get tiring getting tweets from random people asking you why the Cowboys lost?
Not really. I've just tried to have fun with it. Try to be clever. Sometimes I think I'm decently clever, and other times I'm probably not. But I just try to have fun with it and see if it's a troll or if it's somebody that's really that clueless. And then if they are, like, see how far I can take it and just enjoy it.
I think I saw a couple tweets right before the Cowboys game against the Packers. I think you had tweeted about a certain athlete and their performance, and somebody had tweeted back at you like, "Aren't you supposed to be preparing for the Packers?"
Yeah, I get that a
So
lot. I get that a lot. I get a lot if I tweet in game, how do you have time to do this? And of course, I have to be snarky and say, well, the commercials are long these days. I can tweet during commercials.
love it. Mike, you are an NFL agent. So again, just for the audience, not associated with the Cowboys in any way. But you are an NFL agent and you have a long history of representing players in the NFL. Before that, even, you have a long history with football just in general. And so really the way that I think I want to set up this podcast today is I'd love to get into who is Mike McCartney, the person, and then how that ties into your professional experience and the way that you deal with players and the way that you try to represent them, and then some of the values that you hold just as a person, kind of how it all ties in to this, full package of Mike McCartney, the NFL agent. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Thank you.
Fantastic. So I figured a good place to start is with a phrase, "Football is here, goodbye, dear." What does that mean to you?
That means a lot. So I grew up with a dad who was a football coach, and my dad coached high school football and basketball when I was really young. Um, Incidentally, won a state championship in football and basketball in the same year in Michigan. He coached a Divine Child, which my full circle moment was working with Aidan Hutchinson, who went to Divine Child many, many years after that. But then my dad got hired in 1974 by the University of Michigan and Bo Schembechler to be a football coach on that staff. And my dad he was a terrific football coach, obviously a great dad and all that, but he was singular focused. And when football season came around, if he was home, he wasn't home. His mind was in the office. And so my mom, every August 1st, had a saying, "Football's here, goodbye, dear. We'll see you in about 6 months." And he would be home, but he just would look right through us. So we knew it. That's the way I grew up. I love being a coach's kid. I love being around it. So it wasn't hurtful or anything. It just, you grew up in a home where you knew football was first 6 months.
So following in your father's footsteps, he was at Colorado. You joined Colorado as a quarterbacks coach, as an assistant recruiting coordinator, and you were there from 87 to 89, I believe. And that seemingly was your first run-in with, football at least the college level, right? Being a part of a team. And so I'm curious what that experience was like at Colorado and some of the lessons that you take from that experience and still apply to your life today.
Yeah, I actually played college football. I played at two different schools. I was a quarterback. Once 1986 rolled around, I knew that my career was pretty much over. So I ended up transferring to Colorado and was the assistant recruiting coordinator for 2 years, 87 and 88. And then I was a graduate assistant football coach in 89. Pretty unreal time. That's when Colorado really started to become a top program. We were relevant in 87 to 88, and then in 89, we had a great team. And it coincided with our star quarterback, Sal Anesi, in the spring of 89, being diagnosed with inoperable stomach cancer. And he ultimately died less than 6 months later during the season. And what makes the story even really kind of crazy is 3 weeks after he was diagnosed with the inoperable stomach cancer, my sister gave birth to his baby. So it was really an amazing time. And, the head coach daughter having a kid with the star quarterback, and watching just how our family handled that, how my dad handled it, assuring Sal that, hey, your position on the football team has zero to do with what's happening off the field. And just him and my mom in particular leading our family to love Sal and his family. And then not knowing, of course, 3 weeks before my nephew TC was born, that we were going to find out this horrific news that a 20-year-old kid had inoperable stomach cancer. So that was a really interesting time. When he first was diagnosed in early April, he was still strong and his attitude was great. And we thought that he had a chance to maybe beat it. And so the spring and summer, he was around, and early spring he was around. And then in the summer he left. And when he came back, we were 2-a-days. And I'll never forget, towards the end of practice, my dad called the team together and said, hey, Sal's going to join us. And they all erupted. And he said, but he's not going to look like you guys remember. And he looked like he was dying. And it was really sobering. And then he ended up passing away on a Saturday night when we had a bye week. And so we were a top 10 team at that point. And, the memorial service was on a Monday, which was really hard. Our practices were not very good, as you can only imagine. And then we went out to Washington, and University of Washington Husky Stadium can be really loud because it's kind of an open stadium where the open end, the noise goes and hits the Puget Sound and comes right back. And it's one of the loudest stadiums I've ever been in. And our players were, really hurting over losing Sal. And in the first quarter, we threw an interception, and that might have been one of the loudest places I've ever heard. They were in all purple for the first time, and they were really hyped to play us because we were a top 10 team. Well, then we ran a variation of the wishbone called the eye bone back then. And we started handing the ball off to our fullback and got physical with them. I think we were up 45-6 in the fourth quarter. So, we ended up blowing them out. And when we got back, or as we were headed home, I think we realized that we had a really special team, and that team really bonded, in part because of what happened with Sal. And it was just an amazing year. We ended up 11-0, undefeated, ranked number 1 in the country before we lost to Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl that year. So it was just a magical time. And for me, the one tough part was everywhere I went, whoever I ran into, hey, where's your dad? Where's your dad? Where's your dad? And that got old. So when the season ended, I was like, I think I need to move on and just kind of, carve my own path. And so that's when I left after spring ball and ended up coaching at North Carolina for 2 years.
So after your college days, you end up becoming a college and pro scout for the Bears, and then you eventually transitioned to the Eagles as the director of pro personnel. I'm curious, as you made your transition to the NFL, like what was something that stuck out to you, or just the main difference between, NFL football and college football?
Well, I would say, college football has evolved a lot, obviously, since then. But the NFL is just a business, right? You're dealing with grown men who, in many cases, were married with families, and you're melding a team of, rookies coming in the league that were maybe, single and not, hadn't lived as much, with grown men. So trying to put together a football team, and with all those pieces was something you would think about. Whereas in college, the age gap was 4 or 5 years at most. So that was a huge difference. And just the business of the NFL, once you sign a guy in college, at least back then, he was on your team, and you weren't going to go and upgrade him until the following recruiting cycle. Well, it's not like that in the NFL. They can get rid of guys real quick. So the roster movement every day, learning the ins and outs. I always felt like it really takes 4 to 5 years before you really understand the totality of what goes on in the National Football League, whether it's, personnel, coaching, management council that runs the team salary cap, or the NFLPA who works for the players. There's just so much that goes on, and it takes time. And so it was fun, learning that. When you get in the NFL the first year, I can remember pinching myself, like, I can't believe I'm in the National Football League. This is amazing. It doesn't take long where you stop pinching yourself. It's a job. So
I was going to ask you, do you still pinch yourself?
I don't at all. It's a job. I enjoy it. I wake up with energy every day. I love what I do. I love what I do now because I work with really high character people. And it is fun to be in the National Football League. And, I've been there 32 years, so I know enough people and all that. But I do remember that feeling I initially had. I don't have it the same way anymore. So even though I do enjoy it.
Listen, not to ruin the rest of the podcast here, but we will absolutely get to your work with Kirk Cousins and the work that you were able to do with him earlier this offseason with his contract with the Atlanta Falcons. It's actually funny enough, it's how I actually came across your name because, obviously being a huge football fan, everybody saw the news with Kirk Cousins' new contract. And, everybody was saying, it's funny enough, I was reading the comments of the post on Twitter, and people were saying, who is Kirk Cousins' agent? Because that guy deserves a raise. And I was like, who is his agent? Let me find out. And I stumbled across you. So definitely want to get into some of that stuff later on. But before we get there, I'm curious, and I've asked other people who have come on the show, and they've had various answers, but seemingly, as you said, football is a business. And with any business, the goal is to make money. The way that teams make money is by being good, right? Selling out stadiums, selling merchandise. A key to success, I would say, for most football teams is having a good quarterback. And so I'd say a large part of the sport revolves around finding that franchise guy, that person that will take the team to new heights, that will make the team successful, etc. And a big part of that is drafting a good quarterback. And so seemingly drafting good quarterbacks has become more and more difficult, or at least drafting, at the top of the first round, drafting one of those top guys doesn't seem like a surefire pick anymore. And you look at Brock Purdy, what he's been able to do as the last pick in the draft. You look at the debate between CJ Stroud and Bryce Young last year and how that's kind of played out. And now we get into this year with Penix and Jane Daniels and some of the top guys that are coming out. From your perspective and your experience as a scout and now an agent and being around the game for as long as you have, what seems to be the most difficult part about trying to project how a quarterback is going to fare in the NFL? Like, why do we have such a difficult time, picking the right guy?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance to that. And I think there's two key issues in my mind. One, the college game is so different from the NFL game in many respects. Just keeping it kind of simple. So many of the college offenses, a quarterback sits in shotgun. He doesn't have to call a play in the huddle. He looks to the line of scrimmage, and the coaches then relay the play in, and the quarterback then calls the cadence, may have a 2-man route, maybe a 3-man route, and then he runs the ball if he doesn't deliver it. He doesn't have to call the play in the huddle. He doesn't have to ID the mic on the defense. And in too many cases, really doesn't have to work through much of a progression because it's all kind of predetermined, fields cut in half. Well, the pro game is just completely different. They do have to call plays in the huddle. They do have to understand fronts and all that. have to work through progressions. And oh, by the way, they get 25 seconds. The college game has impacted the pro game greatly. We see so much more pre-snap movement. There's just so much going on. And the truth is, it takes time for these guys to get comfortable, which leads to the second piece. And I think having a winning culture is paramount for a young quarterback. And I haven't done a super in-depth study on this, but I would say that probably most of the bust in the first round for quarterbacks is they had to play on a team that lacked a winning culture. You look at Kansas City, and I can remember Patrick Mahomes hearing GMs and scouts rave about his upside and his tools and his talent, but also cautioning that he might need 2 years of development. And what did he do? He sat all but the last game, but he was in a winning culture. And when he started playing, he was a great player. Whereas other guys go into a culture that's not winning. I live in Chicago. Chicago's obviously in the news with the first pick, and maybe they haven't won a lot of games to this point, but Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus have built a foundation so that if they do take Caleb Williams, he's coming in to a roster that has been developed for 2 years. Bryce Young didn't get that luxury. CJ Stroud did. They had been building that roster, and they brought CJ in a time, maybe the Bears bringing Caleb in a time where there are enough good players around them. And if you think about it, a rookie quarterback probably isn't going to work through a progression 1 to 5 with 5 receivers out. He's probably going to, by and large, get 1, 2, and maybe 3. Well, if the first read is not open and the second read is not open, boy, does that put a lot of pressure on that guy, right? And so I go back to Ryan Poles and the Bears. Give him credit. Like, he recognized, hey, we've got one good one in DJ Moore, but now you add Keenan Allen. You have 2 tight ends. So whoever the quarterback is, when he hits his 5th step, his chances of having his first read, second read open are far greater than the Carolina Panthers quarterback had last year. And so many of these young quarterbacks don't have that luxury. And if you don't have the guys open, and now you're having to scramble, you're having to buy time. And if you can't throw the ball in rhythm on time, you're getting hit in the mouth a lot. And, it takes a toll, especially when you're, as a young quarterback, not 100% sure of where you're going to go with the ball every snap. So I think it takes time for quarterbacks to develop. And I just go back to that second piece. Having a winning culture is enormous for a young quarterback, just enormous. And some of these teams, not going to call anybody out, but some of these teams in the top, let's say 10, 12 picks, really don't have that winning culture in place. And we're going to watch them draft a quarterback. And I would tell you, if we could play this clip in 4 or 5 years, it's not going to be all that surprising who is successful and who isn't. And then one last piece of that is the pressure to play these guys because the money's so big, right? It takes a strong owner, a strong head coach, a strong general manager to say, hey, we are not going to play this guy the first X amount of weeks or even the first season. These guys, many of them need to be redshirted. They just do. The reality is they could use that time. But the pressure to play them, especially when they're not winning, it's easy to say, well, let's just get them reps. Well, not all reps are good reps, right? If you get hit in the mouth over and over and over again, and you're losing confidence because you can't find open receivers because there are none, and you're getting sacked and you're getting hurt every week, it's just, you mentioned Brock Purdy. You talk about a winning culture now, best play caller in football, best running back in football, 4 receivers who make yards after the catch. Who could say that in the National Football League? He had a culture that, and give him credit, but he was able to spit the ball out quickly to the right guy. And then those guys made plays for him every single game. So I just think winning culture is really important for younger quarterbacks in particular.
We'll get back to quarterbacks, but really quick, I want to take us back to your own career. And seemingly there was an inflection point there when you're with the Eagles and you're the director of pro personnel, and you were starting your days at 4:30 in the morning, and you wouldn't leave the office until 8:30 at night. You would come home just in time to say goodnight to your kids and then seemingly pass out just from working all day. And I believe you were on a car ride home and you told yourself, I can't do this anymore. And if I'm not going to raise my kids, who is? And so you made a career switch. So take us through that time in between, being with the Eagles and then becoming a sports agent. Because when I think about, agents, truthfully, I have no idea how they even get started. Like, how do you even become an NFL agent? Like, how does that happen? So maybe take us through that in between period between, working with the Eagles and then becoming an NFL agent.
Yeah, look, I when I got hired by the Bears in 1992, I considered it a dream job. Like I said, I used to pinch myself every day, and I enjoyed evaluating and learning how to build a roster, construct a team, all those things. I did that for 6 years in Chicago. But when I started, I was single. And when I went to Philadelphia, I had a wife and 2 kids, and life was different. And I, I did grow up without a dad being around for 6 months a year, and I was really kind of struggling with that trying to find that balance. And I can remember that last training camp in 2000. I left our home in South Jersey, and this picture is seared in my mind right now. As I drove away, my wife and the 3 little boys were sitting on the front porch, and I had an hour and 15-minute drive to camp, and I wept and I prayed, Lord, I don't want this anymore. I prayed long and hard. Like, I don't want to wake up in 20 years and ask to raise my kids. So I went through the season, and, we were good. We weren't expected to be good, but Donovan McNabb was in his first year as a full-time starter, and we ultimately ended up 2 games from a Super Bowl, and we got beat by the Giants in the Meadowlands. And it was on that drive home from North to South Jersey where I did take inventory with my life. I will bring this story up in recruiting, and I tell players, if you hear one thing, don't take inventory after a tough loss. Wait a couple of days. Probably wasn't the best time to take inventory after getting knocked out of the playoffs. But the truth is, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, I can't keep doing this. And I loved what I did. I thought I would have been a general manager, but at some point, trying to find balance and finding balance doesn't mean you don't work hard, right? Of course, you're going to work hard, and you're going to have seasons that are even, days that are longer than other days. But I needed something where I could still raise my family. And I can remember I prayed long and hard for weeks and started thinking about becoming an agent. I knew a lot of agents because I was a point person at the Eagles at the time. Agents would call me to see if the Eagles had any interest. So I knew a lot of agents. And I remember as I started thinking about it, everyone in my life, other than my wife, told me I was crazy, including my dad. Everyone. And yet I just felt like God put it on my heart. And so, Eagles kind of made it easy because they fired the general manager and I. So ended up getting hired by, at the time, Priority Sports in Chicago, and we had moved back to Chicago, where my wife was from, and so then I had to take a test and get certified by the NFLPA. So to become an agent, you do have to go through a curriculum to show that you can handle the job. You have to have an advanced degree or at least a lot of years of experience. So I joined Priority and took the test in January. I will remember this. The 2 things about taking the test back then, it was in DC, and they gave us a rate at the Ritz-Carlton, which was kind of cool. And I was on the top floor, and my room was next to the presidential suite. And who was staying at the presidential suite or in it? I never saw him, but Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And I thought that was pretty cool. So he was literally in the next room next to me. So I never saw him, and I didn't camp out. But the other thing I remember about taking that test is they asked, there were probably 250 people in the room, all trying to become new agents. And they said, how many of you, by raising your hand, think you have a draft pick this April? And over 200 hands went up. And I'm like, wow, there are some clueless people in this room, because there's only 250 to get drafted anyway, you know? And so I had two. I was fortunate. I had Josh McCown, who was my first ever client, and from Sam Houston State, and his teammate, Keith Heinrich. So I knew if I had two, and some of my partners had a few, that the guys and gals in this room were not going to have draft picks. So those were a couple of things I remember. But yeah, so I had to go through a process to become an agent. And, that's when, and the rules have evolved, and the game's evolved a lot since then.
So I was going to ask about Josh McCown because, like you said, he was your first client. And I'm curious because Josh was quoted saying that the reason he chose you was because of your integrity. What does that mean to you? Like, what is it? What does integrity mean?
Integrity, especially as an agent, means credibility and honesty. I have made a pledge that I'm going to be honest at all times. I'm not going to, fudge the truth. I'm not going to fudge numbers. I do believe this. I think there are two kinds of agents. I think too many agents will make decisions for their players with their own personal bottom line in mind. And I think that's tough. I just made a pledge that I will always do what's best for my player, and the bottom line will take care of itself. And there are times where you make a decision for a player, maybe it's a shorter deal where you're exposed as an agent, where the client can move on. And I see a lot of, situations where agents will do these long-term deals. And one of the things that you think about is, well, they can't get fired for all those years, right? So there are, just in the decision-making process and how you communicate with the player, how you communicate with the club, and having credibility, all those things matter. I think one of the things that's becoming a bigger pet peeve than ever is when we see contracts being listed on Twitter, especially in free agency. It's amazing how many of them will say, so-and-so is going to make up to this amount of money. Well, as soon as you see up to, then that's not the real deal, right? So why is an agent going to do that? Well, by and large, they're going to do it because they want the bigger number so they can recruit off of it. And even though the player will never make that dollar amount, it's something they can sell in recruiting. I can't do that. I wasn't raised that way. And I'm real fortunate to be at two firms. I was at Priority Sports for 21 years, and now I'm at VaynerSports, and neither of those firms would ever do that. So those are just little things that I notice in the industry. But having integrity and credibility, it starts with credibility and honesty. You want your yes to be yes and your no to be no. So it's when you do it for 23 years, you've got a lot of opportunity to show whether you have it or not.
How do you go about finding new clients? I always thought it was interesting. I'll see an athlete post, I've decided to partner with, let's say Mike, or, insert agent X. Like, how does that process work? Is it word of mouth? Do you reach out to the athletes? How does all that go down?
Yeah, recruiting, we have to recruit. We have to go out. We have to go find the players. So we have a process of sort of evaluating the tape. We get help with that. We talk to a lot of people in the league. I personally put a huge premium on character. I have a crude kind of character grading scale, ABC, and A kid does everything right. Everybody makes mistakes, but they learn from their mistakes. They want to do things the right way. C will jump to C. Those guys are always looking to cut a corner. They're always looking for a handout. And like a bell curve, A's and C's are kind of outliers. Most people are probably B's, and depending on who you let influence them, they can migrate either to the A or the C category. And so I've just been really blessed to represent a lot of A plus type people, Aidan Hutchinson, Sean Lee, Kirk Cousins, Paul Posluszny, AJ Hawk. I'm going to leave out so many. Joe Tooney, Josh Dobbs. There's so many guys that are just A plus, high character guys, and that's what my focus is on. Is finding those kind of guys. So we do a lot of homework on the character, the ability. Now we have to make our decisions to sign players long before the decision's made on what's going to happen on draft day, we sign them in, let's say late December, early January, before an all-star game, before combine, before medical, before the 40, pro days. So we have to make our decisions without all the information. Now, our advantage is we get in their living room. We get a chance to really get to know them. So over time have learned, in the interview process with these guys to try to be extremely upfront with who I am and what I'm looking for. And I chase a lot of guys away that way, and that's okay, because I'm not right for everybody in the locker room, but I'm right for, I think, the right kind of kids. So, so that's a real big focus, is finding. Of course, we want good football players because they're going to make a good living. They're going to do well financially, but it's without having character. To me, it's not worth it.
What do you view as your responsibility as an NFL agent?
My job is to be an advocate for the player, and that can show up in a myriad of ways. It certainly shows up in a contract negotiation. It shows up in an injury situation. We can get second opinions and want to make sure that the player has, understands all his medical rights, surgeon of choice, all those things. And then we spend a lot of time making sure we know the right doctors, the experts in that particular body area, because I know football. I do think I offer counsel with situations in football, whether it's, you hear this a lot from players, well, such and such a coach doesn't like me, or the strength coach isn't happy with me, or, the strength coach wants me at, I'm just throwing out numbers, 250, and my position coach wants me at 260. How do I handle this? Right. And the truth is, in the NFL, players can lean on other players, but those guys want their job in many ways, whereas with me, they can lean on a guy that was on the team side for 9 years and can understand how to work through some of that. So really, it's just being their advocate and their business partner every single day. And I watch everything. I hardly ever go to games. If I do it, I go to a Monday or Thursday night game, so I don't miss any others. I have 3, big TVs. It's obnoxious. It's great in my basement. So I do watch a ton of football. I try and study my guys and understand them. And I try to talk to them just about their strengths and weaknesses. And not everybody wants to hear about their weaknesses, but in order to help them grow their game and try and take it to another level, that I think that's important, that they know what, hey, here's 2 or 3 things that I can work on, so that maybe next year in free agency, it goes a lot better for me. Right. And then knowing the league, knowing teams and situations. And, I study these teams and their depth charts. And it's not that I know every single player, how he can play, but I think I understand, for the most part, how teams work and what their needs are, and maybe their strengths and weaknesses as far as coaching or management, or what it might be, whatever it might be.
Mike, I have to move us on to the topic of Kirk Cousins, and it's one that I have been very eager to get into. Funny enough, I was watching your podcast with AJ Hawk, I believe 5 years ago, in preparation for this podcast. And it was funny because back then you were negotiating a contract for Kirk with the Vikings, which was kind of his first big deal, coming off a couple franchise tags with the Redskins back then. And here you are again, having negotiated a huge contract for Kirk again. I guess I'm curious, back when Kirk signed with the Vikings, he was 28 years old. He was coming off a couple great seasons with the Redskins. My vantage point, it seems like it was easier back then to maybe convince the Vikings, hey, this could be your guy. Kirk is now 36, coming off an Achilles, and yet he was able to get a 4-year deal worth $180 million with the Falcons. So lead us through that process and how that negotiation went down with Atlanta.
Yeah, the Atlanta negotiation didn't take long, to be honest, because we really couldn't do anything until the start of free agency. And, understanding that teams don't want to hold out, 40, 45, whatever $1 million, and then lose a player and then lose out on other players. Free agencies just go so fast now. When I got in the league, it was much slower. It sped up probably that year when Kirk went to Minnesota, and now it's a blur. They're most of the big name guys are gone in the first few hours. So I felt a real pressure all along to do right by Minnesota. Had a lot of conversation with Minnesota, and I think they would share that it was positive communication. It was consistent. We just disagreed on what really the second year would look like, and they were good. They were fair. They never said or did anything that was insulting, but the player gets one chance, right, at making sure these next few years are right. So I spent a lot of time in November and December, January, just researching rosters, trying to understand coaching searches, offensive coordinator hires, all those kind of things. And I don't have them in front of me, but I have an ongoing quarterback research Excel spreadsheet that's pretty extensive. And I look at it every single day. It's got all the pro teams and who's in need, who has a situation that I call I have three categories: settled, in need, and unsure. And I think when the season ended, I had 8 teams that I thought had a strong need to upgrade a quarterback, and probably ultimately ended up being 7 or 8. But I look at that every day, and then I have all the free agent quarterbacks or the possibilities of trade. And then I have the whole college draft, because that has a huge impact, right? Like if you're going to pick 1, 2, or 3 in a draft like this, you're probably not going to spend a lot of money in free agency, or if you do, it's a short-term deal. So it all works together, and it just, literally every day looking at this spreadsheet and thinking about it, and then, calling pro guys and general managers around the league. When I say pro guys, pro scouts, and, the teams that don't need a quarterback in particular. Hey, what do you think about this team and their need? What do you think about this quarterback? What would be your worry about Kirk or your concerns? It just having as many just football conversations. It wasn't tampering by any stretch. It's just having football conversations. Nothing different than what we're doing, right? But I would do it with decision makers, and so by the time we get to out of the combine, and then really the combine is just kind of like getting together with friends. There's no negotiation that goes on at the combine. At least I've never negotiated at the combine. It's too far removed from free agency anyway, and I just don't think teams are ready. Maybe they listen to the agents with the big name players, but there's nothing real substantial going on there other than, hey, this team might be on our dance card. That is at most, anything that would happen. And there's nothing crossing a line with that. So I come out of the combine, I have one more week, to figure it all out. And by then I had pinpointed a few teams. And honestly, I kind of, the teams that are at the top of the draft, I have a lot of confidence that they're not going to come after us, right, with the right deal. And then I have a few teams that are maybe drafting a little lower, and those are the teams that I really sort of pinpointed. And so then, with Minnesota, again, a lot of conversation. We got to a place where we agreed that it would make sense for Kirk and I, to go to free agency. So at 11 o'clock Central Time, I live in Chicago, as I said, it starts. And 11:01, the Falcons call, and I immediately said, hey, if you're serious about this, we need to do this quickly. We need to do it quickly for Minnesota, because I don't want to hold them up if we leave. And we need to do it quickly for you, so that if you do get Kirk, then you can get other receivers, other offensive players. So listen, this is what we're looking for. Are you in the ballpark or not? and they were really in that ballpark pretty quick. I mean, real quick. So that's why it was able to go so quick. I'll take you back when we had the lockout in 2011. We lost the entire off season, and they basically, when they agreed to a new CBA, we had 1 week to cram the entire off season in. And it was the most fun week I had as an agent. It was exhausting. I didn't sleep, but there was no hardly negotiation. It was like, hey, this is what we can do. Are you in or out? And I had probably 10 free agents that week, and it was great. That's what it feels like now in free agency. There's no real time, especially when you're at the very top with that kind of money sitting in the open market to play games. You just have to get to it. So fortunately, Kirk and I had a lot of conversations about each of those situations, each of those teams. And Minnesota was always super attractive to come back to because that would have been year 3 in Kevin O'Connell's offense. Of course, they got great weapons on offense. You know, that they're a good football team. You know, Atlanta was attractive because they were on the come. You know, if you go back to 2018, Minnesota was coming off an NFC championship game. And so when Kirk signed there was a lot of pressure for him to play at a high level. And when we signed, you know, their running game was good, their defense was good, and both of those sort of deteriorated pretty quickly. Whereas Atlanta is more on the come and just doing a lot of homework. They've got young weapons, but they also have a lot of younger, quieter guys that were in my research, they were starving for a leader. They were starving for, you know, a guy to take command of that football team. And so I didn't even get into this with Atlanta that much. It was more Kirk and I on the front end before it actually started, really talking through, you know, and we had done this once before, obviously in 2018. So I knew that he had a lot of confidence that I was going to be ready and thoroughly research these teams. And, you know, some of this is obvious, right? But some of it is there's nuance to it and just kind of presenting it the right way. So that's why I was able to go so quickly because we had done a lot of homework, as I've said, and Atlanta knew, hey, if we're going to get Kirk, we got to come after him right away, and we got to come hard. And I just made a big deal, guys. We got to do this really quick. I do not want to be unfair to Minnesota, and if we get a similar deal, we're probably going back to Minnesota. So if you want him, he's got to move a wife and kids. So you got to make it worth his while to move. And I give Atlanta credit, and I give Minnesota credit. They were terrific. I dealt with 3 guys: the head coach, the general manager, Kwesi, and then the cap guy, Rob Brzezinski. And I have unbelievable respect for them, how they handled it. It was not easy. It's just, this is business. It's hard. And they were first class every step of the way.
I have to ask you this question because I have this debate with my friends all the time, and it involves going to certain cities in the NFL. Now, I will say I think this is more pronounced in the NBA because in the NBA, I think there is a larger distinction between, let's say, large, you know, big market teams and small market teams. So, you know, playing in a Los Angeles versus playing in a Sacramento, you know, those 2 teams will get much different national coverage, you know, sponsorship deals, perhaps, popularity, etc. When it comes to the NFL, my feeling is that every city is a big market just because of the popularity of the NFL, how many fans watch it each year. You know, you mentioning Kirk having a family and a wife and kids and obviously finding a fit for them as well. Like how much do players think about the city that they're going to? You know, let's forget about the football team and maybe the situation that they're in and what weapons they might have, but just like the city and the surroundings. Like, do NFL players ever say like, listen, I'd love to play in Jacksonville, you know, for the team, but the city, I don't know about that.
It's a great question. And I actually go through this with players before free agency. And what I say to them is, let's put teams in 3 categories: tier A, B, C. Tier A, here's what I want for you. And this would be tier A. If you can join a team that excites you football wise, where you jump out of bed with energy every day. And in Kirk's case, you like the quarterback room, you enjoy the organization, you have a chance to win, and you feel really good about the football piece. That's great. Let's check that box. By the same token, when the day ends, you're just as excited to go home, and your wife and your kids enjoy where you're living. If we can find both of those elements, that's tier A. Now, tier B would be, hey, the football is good, don't really love the city, or the city's great, not sure about the football. Let's put them in tier B. Tier C, they better pay a lot of money because I really don't want to play there, right? So the truth is, there's really not that many tier A's. I have right here in front of me, I don't think you can see it, I have all my free agents, and I look at this every day. And part of the exercise in going through this with them is we do this without emotion before free agency starts. Now, when the bullets are flying, for lack of a better phrase, during free agency, and it gets emotional, or maybe we're not getting everything we want, we go right back to our research and say, okay, tier A, tier B, tier C. And, well, this team's tier C is offering a lot of money, but is this really what you want to, where you want to be? And Josh Dobbs is a good example. We talked a lot about, in his case, how important it was to be in a great football setting, So I think that's a great question. And I can't tell you that my early years as an agent, I spent as much time on that. I have learned that that's really important to prepare guys and educate them and have them take ownership that way in telling me, hey, Evan Ingram last year, when he ended up getting franchised, we went through the exercise. We had 2 teams in tier A because he was so strong about wanting to stay in Jacksonville. Well, because we went through that exercise, it was really helpful for me to understand that, not just know it, but understand it. So when he did get the franchise and we were negotiating with them, I knew how badly he wanted us to resign. And it wasn't about destroying the contract. It was, let's get a good contract, but let's keep you in Jacksonville. So I think I've learned through the years to make this a key part of my process prior to free agency.
I can tell you're a big fan of tiers, by the way, as well. Seemingly, it seems like you put everything in a nice tiered system. I love it. I mean, I think it's a great, obviously a great way to stay organized. So, and it's working. It's working real well. Mike, I love the NFL. Every Sunday is a holiday for me during the NFL season. I'll put on Red Zone. I'll have my big TV going with Red Zone. I'll have my laptop open for the Niners game. I'll have that little two monitor system going, and I'll just sit on the couch all day. So I'm a big fan of the NFL. I'd say I'm pretty well versed in the players and the teams and all that good stuff. Play fantasy every year. But when it comes to contracts, I am a lost puppy, for lack of a better phrase. And so, I'll see something like Kirk Cousins' contract where it says 4 years, $180 million. And I'll say, wow, like 180 million. But then I'm sure that there's a lot of details in that contract that maybe, let's say, the average fan like myself doesn't necessarily pay attention to. So if you don't mind, could you dumb down NFL contracts for me and specifically talk to maybe using, Kirk Cousins' latest contract as an example of some of the details that most fans don't realize?
First thing I look at a contract is, when can a team get out? And so that's tied in with guaranteed money. So typically, if a team, if an agent can negotiate a deal where we know the player is going to be there for at least 2 years, that's a good starting point. And then 3 years is really good. So in Kirk's case, you have to look at what is fully guaranteed at signing. So in the National Football League, if a player were to be released, the NFL team has to submit a form to the NFL and essentially say, hey, we are releasing this player because either his skill, an injury, or the salary cap. Now, usually it's skill. So if they're going to be able to release one for any one of those three, a player for any one of those 3 reasons, then as agents, we say, hey, you're going to pay this guy those $10 regardless of skill, injury, and cap. So you may see in some analysis online, SIC, that's skill, injury, cap. So when a contract is fully guaranteed at signing, or what is fully guaranteed at signing. That's what that refers to. In Kirk's case, he's got his contract's pretty flat in the set, and then we look at cash flow. So he's going to make 62.5 in year one, and then but through 2 years he's at 90, which is his 45 million average, right? In an ideal world, we'd have a little bit more money in year two, but you can't get everything. So there's some trading. All 90 million is fully guaranteed at signing. And then in year three in his contract, he's got 10 million that's guaranteed for injury at signing, that at the beginning of year two, so a year from now, that'll convert to a full guarantee. So I refer to that as a practical guarantee. It's not fully guaranteed at signing, but there's no way he's not going to get that 10 million, right? So that's where the 100 million guarantee comes in, 90 fully at signing, the extra 10, which starts as injury only and then converts to a full. So the first thing I always look at is when can the club get out and how does the guaranteed money work? Then I look at cash flow, and then we look at other details. For example, a couple of our wins in Kirk's contract, a lot of times you'll see what we call a per game roster bonus. And a per game roster bonus means that for every game the guy dresses, he gets paid more money. Well, we don't want that as agents and players, because if he doesn't dress, he loses the money. Teams want that. So if he doesn't dress, they may have to go find somebody else where they can allocate those dollars, right? Chase Young just left your team, went to New Orleans, and he's got 7.9 million in per games. I think it's 470,000 per game. So let's say he's healthy, he passes physical, and he rolls his ankle and misses 10 games. That's 4.7 million gone forever, right? So per games are not good for players. And in Kirk's case, we don't have any, which is pretty amazing coming off a torn Achilles. The other thing is, especially for a veteran, an older veteran like Kirk, you don't want a workout bonus, because then you have to be there the entire program. And it gives a guy like Kirk, flexibility in the off season if he doesn't have a workout bonus. And so he doesn't. And that was always a debate, which was fine with Minnesota, but Atlanta, he doesn't have any of that. So when we talk about guarantees and cash flow and structure of a contract, those are the things we're kind of looking at. And then, of course, we know what every team or every player in the league is making. We have our own data where we analyze, percentages by season, all those kind of things. But that's all part of the structural points of a contract. I don't know if you learned one thing, if I made it more complicated. We could talk hours about contracts, but that's kind of the high level view.
Right. No, I think that's fascinating because, again, as an average NFL fan, the example of Chase Young is great because, that's something that I would never, think to dig up or to at least see. And it's not something that's advertised when the player signs, at least, on Twitter or other websites. It doesn't say, hey, Chase Young signed this deal. Oh, yeah, by the way, he has, this many, per game roster bonuses. So I think, going a level deeper kind of, showcases some of those details that, again, I think the average fan just fails to see and fails to realize. But, for Chase, a guy who, has struggled with injury, again, it seems like a team friendly contract, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think there's the team protected himself in case of further injury. When I first started as an agent, I was in the league when the salary cap was instituted, and it was so different back then. And then I became an agent, and we had to rely on whatever the NFLPA would give us, and which was fine. And we were able to do our own research, but there was nothing online back then. There are two websites in particular I think maybe the average fan would enjoy going to: Spotrac, SPOTRAC.com, and they've got every sport, and then overthecap.com. Both of these sites do a great job of following individual players, teams, who has cap space, who doesn't. they now have models where you can have fun and say, okay, if we trade Joey Bosa, this will create this much cap space. And, so they're really kind of cool websites. And I tap into both of those websites now every day. We don't rely solely on that because we have to make sure the data is right. But those are two websites I think, as a fan that you can enjoy, really understanding your team's salary cap situation and the ramifications of when a guy's cut, dead money, all these things that you maybe hear us talk about that you don't completely understand.
That just go right over my head. We'll put those links in the description of this episode so that everyone can go check them out. Mike, a couple more questions to round us out here. It's fascinating because recently in the NFL, when it comes to contracts, it seems like running backs, or at least their value in the marketplace, has taken a significant hit. And this data might be wrong, so please don't come after me. But I think this past offseason, there was maybe 9 or 10 running backs signed for a total. I think in total, all of their guaranteed money was $90 million across 9 to 10 running backs. So if you average it out, they got, maybe 9 to 10 million guaranteed salary per running back. I remember the days when AP was getting, ridiculous amounts of money. Deservedly so. He was the best running back, but now it seems like that's changed. I'm curious your perspective and your projection for quarterbacks, because it seems like to win a Super Bowl, you either have to have a Mahomes, so generational talent, or you have to have a quarterback that is on a very friendly contract. So like a Brock Purdy, any rookie quarterback allows you to fill out the rest of your team. I'm curious what your perspective on that is, and if the quarterback market will shift in any way or correct itself, because the way that things are going, these contracts are going to keep getting larger and larger.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to affect the quarterback position that much. One of the things that we look at is what percentage of the overall cap is allocated to each position. And the quarterback allocations have definitely grown in recent years, whereas other positions have not. Obviously, because if you're going to give more to the quarterback, it's a piece of pie, right? And there's only so much that each position group can have. So, but the one thing is you can't win without one. And, not to call out the Redskins, but they've never been the same since Kirk walked out of their building, right? And not sure they completely valued him. Maybe they valued him a little more after they didn't have him, right? You have to have one, and you have to have one that can play at winning football levels. Listen, there's only one Patrick Mahomes. There's only, 5 top 5 quarterbacks. The challenge in this league is finding, let's say top 6 to 12 or 6 to 14 and producing a winner. That's the challenge for teams right now. But I don't think the quarterback position is going to slow down. I just think it's just too important. You can't win without one. So, and there's only so many men on this planet that can play at a winning level at that position. So I do believe it's going to continue to rise, commiserate with the cap.
One last question, Mike, and then we will end this podcast in a manner that we end every single podcast here on the Victory Degree. First, the question. I thought it'd be interesting. So I have a whole list of your past clients and current clients, but we'll keep it to 3 people just for the sake of time. So I have signaled out Kirk Cousins, Josh Dobbs, and Aidan Hutchinson. And I was hoping if you could give the audience a little bit of insight into who these men are off the field.
Yeah, Kirk is, he's a great husband and father, cares deeply about his faith, very giving with, to organizations. He's just a positive guy and, very home. He's home a lot. He's with his family. He does share his faith a lot. He goes to churches and different organizations. And so I guess I would characterize him first and foremost as a family man. He's going to spend, a lot of time with his wife and kids. Josh Dobbs is, he's a rocket scientist. He can't sit still. He's always doing something to help others. I can remember when his senior year at Tennessee, there were fires in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that were in the news, and I think it was a few hour drive, and it was an off day. And I talked to one of the Tennessee coaches, and he said they were watching the news that afternoon, late afternoon, and there's Josh Dobbs helping with the Tennessee fires in Chattanooga, right? Like he goes to children's hospitals. He's amazing in that. It's just he wants to help others, and he's an astronaut in the making. So like he's one of the most unique guys in the National Football League. And then Aidan Hutchinson, is he's just obsessed with being great. He takes care of his body. He watches everything he puts in his body. Comes from both his mom and dad, his family. But he's like Josh in the sense that he's going to children's hospitals. He's reaching out to help people in need in that Detroit area community. Every time I go to a game, I don't go to many, like I said, but there's somebody there afterwards, either in a wheelchair or in need. He's also amazing in giving his time. A great family man, spends a ton of time with his sisters and mom and dad, but I would say obsessed with being great. And honestly, all three really are. But you're in different stages of their life too. You pick one that's a little bit older, one that's in the middle, and then one that's younger, right? And on the climb. I have a feeling though, Aidan is going to be a great, he is a great player, but he's going to continue to grow and when they give him some help on the other side of the pass rush, I have a feeling he's going to have a monster year coming up soon.
Yeah, he was one guy I was definitely worried about in the NFC Championship game because you do have to game plan for him. It's remarkable, like you said, he's so young, and yet it feels like he has such a presence on the field. You can't help but notice him every time he plays. So I love those words that you said about all three. Mike, I have a quote here, somebody talking about you, and the quote goes, "His clients aren't commodities, but rather players in whom he sees his reflection." And so I wanted to say that quote to you because you talk about the high character, guys that you represent, and I think ultimately it's a representation of who you are as a person. And if you don't get a chance to sit down with Mike McCartney, I think just taking one look at the players that he represents will tell you everything you need to know about Mike. So kudos to you.
Appreciate that. I haven't heard that quote, so thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Mike, we're at an hour, and I figured this would be a good place for us to wrap up. Truly amazing conversation, but we do have to do one last thing. It's kind of a ritual here on the Victory Degree podcast. And so basically I ask every single one of my guests to leave a piece of advice for the next guest. But the trick is you don't know who the next guest is going to be. And so our last guest on the podcast was actually a running back in the NFL for the Chicago Bears. You might be familiar with him, Raymond Harris.
I was with Raymond. Yeah, love Raymond. Great dude.
Yeah, amazing. Now he's doing his own thing with his company and trying to make it as an entrepreneur. So fantastic conversation with him. His advice for you was there's going to be times where you feel like you can't make it. Those who reach deep down and just keep going are the ones that make it. So first of all, what does his advice mean to you? And then what is your piece of advice for our next guest?
Yeah, it's great advice, Raymond, because, we get knocked down a lot in life. We get knocked down and we get people telling us we can and can't do things. And what I love about football is the greatest lesson of football is what do you do when you get knocked down? You got to get back up. And every day you just got to keep getting back up. So I appreciate his advice a lot. I would share my advice. I think we're in an era where it's so easy to chase the almighty dollar. And look, I'm an agent who who negotiates that. But I would say chase excellence, chase a good name, chase credibility, especially if you're young. And if you chase those things, excellence, a good name, credibility, the money's going to come, right? The attention, whatever you want, whatever you think is important to you, it'll come. Build a foundation on excellence. And if you do that, I think you're going to have more success than you might expect.
What a perfect way to end this podcast. Mike, I cannot thank you enough for your time here today. For those listening or watching, all of Mike's links will be in the description. Check him out on Twitter. He is often confused with Mike McCarthy, the Dallas Cowboys head coach, like we alluded to at the beginning of this podcast, and it's quite hilarious. So highly suggest you go follow Mike on there. Mike, anything else you'd like to plug?
No, I appreciate you. It's been a great hour with you, Nik, and let's see what happens here in the next month with the NFL draft. It should be fun. It should be wild at the top with the quarterbacks, but can't wait for that. And then maybe get away from football for a few weeks. So before I get my batteries recharged for August.
Really quick, who do you think goes number one?
Oh, I think Caleb does. Caleb Williams, yeah. I think the draft really, after that, I don't know. I think J.J. McCarthy's climbing. Drake May and Jaden Daniels have had their pro days this week. Michael Penix. I personally think 4 quarterbacks are going to the top 4 when it's all said and done. So I think it's going to be a wild draft.
Who are you the lowest on? If you had to pick one.
I don't know if it's I'm the lowest. I think they, some guys will really benefit from not playing early. And the less they play their first year, the more they can succeed later. So I think they're all unique. They're all different. Of those 4 in particular, I think, I've never met JJ. I knew his dad. I only lived 10 minutes from him, but I think he's got something inside of him that's pretty special. I used to work with Drake May's parents and at North Carolina. So it's interesting to know a couple of these guys' parents, at least. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch this draft unfold. And then how are the teams going to play them their first year? And a couple of these situations, you really hope they don't have to play.
Agreed. I don't think we have to name the teams, but I think we all know who we might be referring to. Mike, thanks again for your time, and let's definitely stay in touch.
Appreciate you, Nik. Thank you.